Alright, as expected, the Rockets' defensive game plan was to assign Okogie onto Wemby, because first, that just allowed Okogie to switch any of Wemby's screening actions, then second, that allowed them to hide Şengün onto Barnes, so he didn't have to guard Wemby, and the philosophy was somewhat the same with their second unit. Instead of Okogie, it was Dodo, and that lineup might have been even better, because Clint is a natural rim protector, so they used him as the help, and most times, he was either assigned to Bryant or Keldon. During the Wemby minutes, the Spurs guards had to use Barnes, Bryant, or Keldon as the screeners, so a lot of the times, they weren't really looking to exploit the Rockets' bigs, and whenever they tried to force-feed Wemby, he struggled to get a clean look. It really didn't matter who was in front of him, because the Rockets switched 1 through 4, and they were all getting underneath his body, so he was being forced into a lot of tough jumpers. The Spurs tried to get him easier looks by setting pin downs or aways, but more times than not, he was either settling for threes or pulling over top of a contest on ones, and without any rolls or lobs to the rim, he just wasn't able to establish a rhythm, so a lot of those resulted in bricks. At least the Spurs weren't relying on him, so they were still able to generate offense through other advantages, and one of them was during the non-Wemby minutes, because whenever Kornet was on the floor, the Rockets were matching up traditionally. That allowed the Spurs guards to use him as a screener, so they were able to exploit the Rockets' bigs dropping against their screening actions, and early on, it was Fox, because he kept going to their three-man actions to get Reed switched onto him, then attacking that matchup and Şengün on his heels. Harp was even doing some of the same later, and Şengün was by far the Rockets' weakest link, because whenever he was in a drop, the Spurs were able to exploit that, then whenever he was in a closeout situation, they were able to trigger the scramble and play out of that. A couple of those led to Champagnie getting open looks from deep early, and after those, it was obvious he was feeling good, because he was pulling on any sliver of space, so he became another source of offense throughout. He's by far one of the streakiest shooters in the league, because he can go on a ridiculous heater quick, and some of his trades were even in transition, and those were another source of offense, so whenever they caught the Rockets' defense not set, they were able to capitalize. But on the other end, the Rockets were doing the same, because that was also one of their sources of offense, so whenever they caught the Spurs' defense not set, they were also able to capitalize, and they needed all the runouts they could get. The Spurs' defensive game plan was to basically play a box-and-one against K, so they had Barnes face guarding him, then Keldon doing the same whenever he was on the floor, and the Rockets were trying to run pin downs, zips, staggers, or really any screening actions just to break that initial pressure. But even when he got the rock, he was seeing a crowd off his screens. That was forcing him off it or into a tough shot, and fortunately, he wasn't forcing too many of those, so unfortunately for the Spurs, their game plan really didn't work, because the others on the Rockets weren't relying on him. From top to bottom, they were all aggressive, so a lot of the runouts in transition were stemming off them, and it was no different in the half court, because that aggression was translating. Alpi was attacking the Spurs bigs, or just being used as a hub, so he was able to generate consistent offense, and it wasn't just for Reed as the ball handler, because even Amen, Bari, and Tari were using his screens to get their shots off. The Spurs bigs were dropping against all of the Rockets' screening actions, and were only a little higher with their levels against K and Reed, so Amen, Bari, and Tari were coming off clean once one of them turned the corner. But it really didn't matter who was on the rock, because whenever Amen was off it, he was playing in the dunker, and the rest of them were always decisive on the catch, so they all got into a rhythm. That eventually paid off in the fourth, because the Rockets' issue was just their defense, so once they finally started getting stops, they walked the Spurs down the entire quarter, and every stop was just gradually shifting the momentum throughout. They were keeping the Spurs on the perimeter, because the only one that was hot from deep was Champagnie, and the only two looks he got were blocked, so they basically locked the Spurs up. It took until 7.5 minutes remaining before the Spurs could even score their first bucket, because they subbed in Cornet to use him as a screener, and they even decided to keep him on the floor once Wemby subbed back in, so they were playing a double big lineup down the wire. But that wasn't able to get their offense going again, so they couldn't keep up with the Rockets' offense on the other end, because the Rockets were capitalizing off their stops and continuing to play through the others, especially SHEPPARD. He had a crucial stretch of 3 straight buckets, and even Barry hit big shots of his own, and I could tell K had a lot of trust in him, because in the past, he'd usually be demanding the rock and getting frustrated when he couldn't get it, but in this game, he was just allowing them to make plays, or even making the pass to them. Just watch the tape.